release. My name is Dicey to Climb, and this brief tutorial is actually a response to a request from someone on Yoga Glow. The question was, how do you keep the back leg extended in Hanumansana when you're basically inverted, right? So first, I guess we should go over the Hanuman, right? Hanumansana, full splits. When you are in the pose, the tendency is for whichever leg is forward, right? The tendency is for that forward hip to continue to pull forward. So it's almost like your hips, if you were to look at them, right, in an even line, it's almost like the front hip wants to go forward and the back hip is moving back behind you, right? So they're moving at two different rates. So the trick really is with the front hip to activate and pull the outer hip back. So you're almost externally rotating your thigh, except you are spinning the thigh inward, but you're pulling the outer hip back in space. Back leg, you're moving the hip forward, you're trying to square off the pelvis, so you got to use the back leg to come forward. Now, that's easy, I mean, that's already hard enough on the ground, I think. But when you're upside down, it gets a little bit confusing, and I get the question. Now, definitely the trick to keeping any leg straight, obviously, for most of us is learning how to flex our foot, right? Being able to flex through the heel, being able to pull the toes back towards your kneecaps, engaging the quad and actually firming the muscle to bone, right? Moving the quad away from the kneecap. But over time, you can actually start to work on pointing the foot, or you can actually point and spread your toes and push through the ball of the foot, really engaging the leg all the way from the hip through the end of the foot. But a great way to feel what the back leg is supposed to do before you invert is actually check out what your back leg is doing in a pose like Warrior 3, Virabhadrasana 3, right? So you find your balance, obviously, and you can always come up from your crescent pose or whatever the pose is, however you get up there. Warrior 3, outer hip draws back. Imagine you're doing basically Hanumanasana on the standing leg, keeping that hip drawing back. The back hip will naturally try and stay open, which is its tendency to pull back. It's your job to bring the hip down and forward by spinning the back inner thigh up, and also working on reaching through the back leg, right? Flexing, pointing, or flointing, but maintaining energy through the back leg. So that's basically what you want to feel upside down. Another pose, the standing split. Keeping, once your hands come down, maybe the front leg bends or the standing leg bends, but keep that hip drawing back. This hip, see if you can lift it up without turning the hip open. You want to still keep that hip moving forward as you lift the inner thigh up. Okay, so once you end up upside down, it's really, really hard. I'm going to do it both in handstand and in headstand. First, you'll see, I'll show in headstand. Once your hands come down, you guys know the alignment, hopefully here. Elbows firm in, bring the crown of the head down, making a nice triangle with your hands in your head. Elbows over the wrists, shoulders down the back as the elbows hug in. Come up any way you can. Once you're in your Shirsasana B or Shirsasana 2, headstand 2, holding your balance here. Now, let's start with the right leg. So keeping my left leg reaching high for now, I'll just lower my right leg into a pike. Right, now here, once you start to flex through the heel, notice the hips want to twist. Pull the outer hip back so the hips level out. Then see if you can start to take the back leg overhead. Now, my splits are still not that big, but technically I'm still in the splits. I'm trying to work it here. Top of my left thigh is starting to stretch now. Naturally, as I start to go further and further, the hips want to get all wonky. Right hip wants to come forward, left hip wants to go back. Find the opposite. Right hip back, left hip forward, even though I'm extending through the leg. Staying strong in my arms, staying strong in the shoulders, right? So upside down, same thing. The hips want to get off kilter. Whichever leg is leading the way, the hip has to come back. Whichever leg is the extended back leg, reach through the heel, point or floint, but make sure that you're pulling the hip forward back into the hip, right? So, I mean, really to look at it, you have to take it from a Vira 3 stance, or just work your Hanuman and see what it feels like on the ground to actually move your hips back and forth. But essentially, you're always trying to come back to the midline. Front leg pulls back. Back leg pulls forward, the opposite of what your body wants to do naturally, okay? And this is what it looks like in handstand. I'll go with my left leg. All right, so from my standing splits, I'll take my handstand up, press or kick up, but push down into the ground, and as I come up, legs stay fired up. Now, as I come into it here, right, I want to keep my left hip pulling back in space. I want my right hip to continue to move back. I'm reaching my legs apart, but I'm still trying to level out my pelvis as much as I can. So keeping my left hip pulling back, keeping my right hip pulling forward. Extend through the feet. And a great trick, really, is to go to the wall, right, and measure, and from Dandasana staff pose, how long it is from your hips to the heels to touch the wall, or really to push the ball of the foot into the wall. Imagine there's a wall here, right? And I'll plant my hands wherever my hips are. From there, I'll either do my headstand or my handstand. If I'm going to do the headstand, make sure wherever your hands are, that's where your head should go, in between the hands, and then walk the hands back. If you're doing the handstand, keep your hands somewhere along the line of your hips, right? And then from there, you come up however you can come up. And then what you're essentially doing is reaching with the back leg, right? The leg that's supposed to be coming forward, reaching for the wall. Once you tap the wall, work on pulling that hip forward, if I can find my balance here, and work on pulling the extended leg that's in front of you, pull the hip back in space. So the leg that's against the wall, keep pushing into the wall, but then pull the hip forward towards your hip. The other hip, pull it back in space. Try and level out the hips as much as you can. From that position, if you can keep your hips that square and you can keep your legs that active, you can start to take it into deeper inversions. But definitely the trick is to always bring your hips to a neutral position. One hip will want to always go forward, the other hip will always want to pull back. Find the opposite. Whatever you naturally feel, do the opposite for the most part. Our bodies are funky things, but you can always level everything out by doing the opposite of what the body naturally wants to do. That's pretty much it though. That's a very brief tutorial, but hopefully that helps with Hanuman upside down. Same thing when you're down on the ground, just flipped upside down, which is the hardest part, because once you're upside down, your world gets flipped around. So it's hard to really adjust. But just try and bring front hip back hip forward, even though you're extending through the leg. I hope that helps. Namaste, yogis.